was added to all of the bookstores in the United States. And that book was called Where's Waldo? Where's Waldo was a series of incredibly detailed pictures whose goal was to challenge the reader to find one character named Waldo. Waldo, with his red and white striped shirt, his big black glasses, and his knit cap, would always be buried in a cluster of images that were designed to confuse, confound, and entertain the reader. Where's Waldo? The little book was so popular that more books with the same theme and challenges were printed. Each asked the question, where's Waldo? And a lot of us spent a lot of hours looking for that stupid Waldo. The adventure was taking glasses off and who could find him first. But the women went to the tomb on that Sunday morning after Jesus died and immediately asked each other, where's Jesus? Instead of Jesus, the women found two men in shining white clothes standing beside them. And knowing that these figures were messengers from God, we call them angels, the women, not knowing what else to do, bowed to the ground. And the angels asked the question I asked the kids, why are you looking for the living among the dead? They went on to remind the women that Jesus said that he would suffer and die, and then 3 days later, he'd be raised from death. And the women then remembered Jesus' words. He really was alive. He really was alive. And they left the empty tomb and began looking for the living Jesus among the living. Now, days like Easter in church are days when we come to worship hoping to find Jesus, or at least an emotional glimpse of Jesus. And Easter worship is designed to do just that. The music is more plentiful than usual. The flowers are way more plentiful than usual. People are more plentiful than usual. And Easter Day is a day of celebration. It's a day when we know without a doubt that God will never give up on us. It's a day that confirms our belief in Jesus as the risen Christ. It's a day we come to church to hear the story about the empty tomb and the risen Christ. And there's no question that here at Lakeshore, we, like every other Christian congregation in the known world, goes all out for Easter. Because on Easter we come to worship knowing that we will be surrounded in some way by the presence of Jesus. That we will have a glimpse at some level of God alive and working and risen among us. We know that Jesus is alive and risen and work every other Sunday of the year. But Easter is particularly when we come to worship expecting something to happen that will stir our hearts. But how many of us come back to worship the Sunday after Easter and wonder what happened? Easter is designed to be an emotional encounter with the risen Christ. We come to worship with open hearts, expecting, wanting to feel a stir to our hearts. We come to worship hoping that something will happen that will touch our souls and rattle our spiritual cages. We come to worship expecting to feel something. And the place is mostly alive with people. You're all still asleep. Mostly alive with people and very alive with the Spirit. Other Sundays, we might come to worship and wonder, where'd the excitement go? Where's the Spirit? Where's Jesus? Where are the people who were awake the other day? We might feel that the church has pulled a bait and switch on us by getting us all pumped up for Easter, only to become a place of the walking dead the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. And if that ever happens to us, and I suspect it has, we cannot help but wonder, where's Jesus? So where is Jesus? Well, if we want to find Jesus, we're going to have to look for him with our hearts and with our minds, which means coming to worship, coming to life, ready to sing the songs that get our blood pumping. It means coming to worship, ready to participate with every fiber of our beings. It means coming to worship with the expectation that we will give to God in worship as much as we hope to get from God in worship, which means coming to worship expecting and wanting to be challenged by Jesus, because we find Jesus first in our hearts and in our minds. Where's Jesus? Well, we don't just find Jesus in our hearts and minds at church, but we find Jesus out in the world by looking for Jesus in the places where Jesus used to hang out. We find Jesus among people who need him most. We find Jesus in the faces of the hungry, the sick, the poor, and the lonely. We find Jesus in the faces of those who are reaching out to help the hungry, the sick, the poor, and the lonely. We see Jesus in the faces of those who are grieving, those who need to know that this life matters, but there's so much more than this life. We find Jesus in the places where the outcasts gather. We find Jesus even in places where his name might not be welcome, but where he's probably having the most fun. We find Jesus among those who want to believe in something, but yet have found something profound in which to believe. We'll find Jesus in the places most good church people don't want to admit they go. Bars, casinos, strip clubs, neighborhoods where some of us are afraid to walk at night or during the day. We find Jesus at 12-step meetings, drug court, and in prison. We find Jesus having coffee in a public gathering place. We find Jesus talking with groups playing basketball in the parks in our communities. We find Jesus when we go out into the world to serve God's people and God's creation. But here's the problem. Too many of us cannot find Jesus because he's camouflaged by the trappings of the institution of the church. We think we're supposed to look for Jesus in books, or in rituals, or in rules. And we come to church to find Jesus only to have him lost in the smell of candles, dust, a touch of mildew, and a whole lot of boredom. We're not going to find Jesus in a place that does not stir our hearts and challenge our minds. If we come not excited to find Jesus ourselves, whether it's to church or into the world, I guarantee we won't find him. But if we come looking, if we come expecting, if we come hoping, if we come ready for God to do something in our lives, I guarantee we will find Jesus. The men in the tomb asked the women, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" Well, friends, if our hearts are not alive with hope and anticipation in places filled with hope and anticipation, we won't find Jesus. We come to worship this day and every other day because we believe that in this community of people, in the presence of the Holy Spirit, we will be filled with hope and anticipation. We come here believing that the Spirit will move in and among us. And there are going to be some of us who come up to worship thinking, "Oh, I'm here again. I don't know why. I guess I like the people." And those days it'll be enough for the rest of us to be filled with hope and anticipation. But we all have to take our turn. We all have to take our turn being ready for God to come in and stir our hearts and challenge our minds and let us come alive to find Jesus. If we are willing to go into the world expecting to see Jesus in the presence of those who need him most, if we are willing to go into the world hoping that we are getting to work with Jesus that day, we will find him in places we did not expect to find him. If we're willing to open our hearts, eyes, and minds, we will find Jesus wherever we are, alive, well, and changing lives in all of the same kinds of places he went in the first century. I've concluded in my life that finding Jesus is a lot like looking for Waldo. We have to have an idea of what we're looking for. Are we looking for something that's kind of dead, dusty, filled with mildew and boredom? Or are we looking for something that's going to stir our hearts and challenge our minds? Because if we look for that, Jesus is ready, willing, and waiting to set us on fire. We get to be the living among whom people come to look. We get to be the living among whom people go out into the world to find others who need to know the love of God, that Christ is risen. Where is Jesus? Jesus is among the living. That's why we celebrate Easter. Because we find Jesus living and wanting to bring us to life as well. Happy Easter. Amen.